Many thanks to our sponsors who make this festival possible. A good goodbye. Funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. Bernalillo County and the Indigent Program, the Better Place Forests Organization, Bosque Trails Hospice, Conscious Crossroads End of Life Services, Death Doula Professionals, End of Life Options New Mexico, French Funerals and Cremations, Keeper Memorials, thank you for handling the Zoom on this whole festival, and Passages International.
Thank you for joining us today. We've been asked to kind of talk about what we are, who we are, what we do, and hopefully clarify some common misconceptions about the Office of the Medical Investigator and what we actually do for the state of New Mexico. So, sorry, yeah, can you hear me now? Better? Awesome, okay. So thanks again for joining us today. Thank you for introducing me. My name is Dr. Lauren Dvorscak. I have been in New Mexico for, since 2011. I came and trained here, and then I got entrapped, essentially, right? Land of entrapment. You know what I fell in love with? The people and the green chili. That's pretty much it. I couldn't go back to a place that wouldn't put green chili on pizza. Anyway, so I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. I trained in Indiana, so that's where my medical school training was, and then I came here in 2011 and trained as a resident, as a fellow, and then I stayed on. And now I'm serving the state as the deputy chief. Basically, that means I'm second in line running the OMI alongside our chief, who is Dr. Heather Jarrell. I couldn't have put this presentation together without the help of my operations director, which is Lavonda Bowens. She helped me a lot with this, and I also couldn't do it without Veronica Tovar, who is our Supervisor of Decedent Affairs. So you'll learn a little bit about what they do, and we're actually going to tag team in this presentation to kind of involve what her division does in our office. So our office deals with some of the most difficult aspects of life, basically the end of it. Today, I'm sharing with you the work we do at OMI, why it matters, and why each of us should consider how we want to prepare for the inevitable. Starting these conversations early can provide peace of mind and ensure our wishes are respected at the end of our own lives. So a little bit of an introduction to the OMI. The Office of the Medical Investigator was basically replaced the county coroner system back in the 1970s. So we replaced the coroner system and we centralized death investigation for the entire state at that point. And we are tasked by state mandated duty, so state law says that we should investigate unexpected, unexplained, or what we call unattended deaths, deaths that occur outside of a hospital, not under the care of a doctor, essentially. So thinking of that, most of what we actually investigate are natural deaths. However, we also want to make sure we're not missing anything that's suspicious for foul play, etc. So those are what we are tasked as an organization to investigate. So my job as a pathologist is to determine how somebody died, the cause of their death, and how that cause came about, which is the manner of death. And that informs public record, that informs the Bureau of Vital Statistics, that informs death certificates, and then we also do a lot of public health as part of our job. So from sudden illnesses to accidents, each case we investigate gives insight on how we can help protect and educate the public as a whole. Ultimately, we're here to serve New Mexicans with respect, integrity, and doing a thorough and complete job. So this is actually pulled right from our website. We, every year, if you want to know about the types of deaths that we investigate, the things that we see come in through our office, the manners of death that we're seeing most commonly, you can actually pull this report right off of our website. It's called the Annual Report from the OMI, and this table is from that report, showing our overall case volumes. How many deaths are we investigating? And you can see that from 2014 and from the past 10 years, our case volumes overall have increased. We expect a certain number of 3 to 5% increase each year. You can see during the COVID years in 2020, that increase was more like 30%. It's a lot, and now we're starting to level off and see more pre-COVID type expected case volume increases. Again, the vast majority of these deaths that we investigate are natural in manner. So these complete mortality figures for the whole state, we're just a subsection of that. So we don't actually see all the deaths in New Mexico. That's a common misconception. We only see the ones that we have jurisdiction over investigating. So that's this data here, these data here. The complete mortality figures are actually maintained by the Bureau of Vital Records and Health Statistics, and that's under the New Mexico Department of Health. So OMI's mission and values. Our mission is really simple. We're here to serve the living in putting it in very, very simple terms. We want to improve health, safety, and justice in New Mexico. Our values, we are committed to the values that we have listed here in every single case that we handle. So we value respect for the deceased, integrity in our findings, and compassion for those that are left behind. We believe that everybody deserves to be treated with dignity, and every family deserves clear, honest answers during difficult times. OMI's work is truly about serving people, even after life is ended. So OMI's investigations provide very critical insights that help shape public health initiatives and safety measures. We identify trends like what's going on in overdose type deaths, which drugs are being potentially implicated more often than not. We have public health initiatives. I can think of several, including pushing for things like helmet laws and motorcycle accidents, because we see what happens when you're not wearing a helmet, right? We sit on child fatality and morbidity review panels to see what sort of accidental deaths or what types of deaths are impacting our pediatric population. I can think of one of the biggest forefront, not just COVID, but pre-COVID, the Office of the Medical Investigator was instrumental in figuring out the hantavirus outbreak in the 90s. So we are actually at the forefront of public health because we see what is killing people, and we work with partners to say, hey, this is a problem. Let's look at what we can do to prevent those deaths in the future. So for families, we strive to provide some form of closure. It's often the most difficult time in their lives that we meet them. We're just learning who they are. So we offer answers that helped loved ones understand what happened, and in many cases help prevent future tragedies. In short, our work matters to families, communities, and New Mexico as a whole. So then I'm going to move on to common misconceptions about OMI before handing it over to Ms. Tovar. There are common misconceptions about what OMI does and doesn't do. One of the most frequent questions I get asked is whether we're the same as a funeral home. Do you cremate the body there? No, we don't. We work with funeral homes, and we don't handle memorial services ourselves. In fact, you can't even come to OMI and view your loved one. That's not something we have capability or ability to do. You come to OMI, show up wanting to see your loved one, and please don't be disappointed that we'll show you a photo. That's pretty much it. So you'll have to work with a funeral home for viewing and things like that. So we're really a neutral entity that works alongside law enforcement to determine the cause and manner of death. But our role really isn't about assigning blame. It's about getting to the heart of what physiologic process, what underlying injury or poisoning occurred that caused somebody's death. So it's really about the facts. Another misconception is that we handle every single death in New Mexico. Again, we kind of touched on that earlier. We don't. We only investigate certain cases that fall under what we call our jurisdiction or our legal obligation to the state. And mostly, we're trying to investigate those who are unattended, unexplained, or unexpected. With that, I will hand this over to Veronica.
Good morning. I'm Veronica. Some of you are waving at me, so I have a feeling some of you know me. I've been with OMI 29 years, so that kind of, yes, some of you do know me, but you work with me really well. So my part is right now, the importance of preparing for end of life. So we have advanced planning offers, peace of mind, and reduced stress for loved ones. So the reason we're here today is to encourage everyone to start thinking about and discussing end of life wishes. It is a difficult task. Right now, my parents are hitting almost 80, and my daughter works at one of the funeral homes, is pushing them for a pre-need, and my parents look at her like, what are you trying to do, kill us off now? And she's like, no, it's called prepare, we have to have that difficult talk with our elderly. Unfortunately, it is what it is today. You have to have that conversation. So taking steps like completing advanced directive or choosing healthcare proxy can lift a heavy burden from loved ones. It's a gift of peace, one that says, I want you to be sure of what I want. Advanced planning ensures your wishes will be followed, and it will prevent confusion and uncertainty at a time that's already difficult. So we encourage have clear documentation of the wishes, especially regarding medical and funeral arrangements. So with that being said, OMI goes out, we investigate a death. It does help if families have the documents already laid out. A pre-need, their will, their last will and testament, what their wishes are. Because if it's a natural death and we're able to terminate jurisdiction right there, we can release their loved one to the funeral home they selected. The body doesn't need to come with us. We don't need to bring the loved one into our care. We can hold that body at the funeral home that they choose. It makes it easier for families. There's a lot of families that they have the misconception that OMI is cold and, I guess they watch too much TV. But it's not like that. But if we can help a family out, let them have that, let their loved one go to that funeral home. Steps. Discuss the end of life wishes with family. Have that conversation. What can we all do to prepare? First, start talking about your wishes with your family. I had to. I'm in the military. I spent over 30 plus years retired in the military. And before I could deploy, I had to have something in writing of what I wanted done in case I did not come back, which was kind of interesting because I got written up by the Army because I told them I didn't want my daughter notified and I didn't want her in charge of my arrangements because I would still be in Germany, that she wouldn't know what to do with me. I can't put that on at the time she was 19 years old. Can you imagine putting that on a 19-year-old? They don't know what to do. And we see it every day where we have 18, 19, 20-year-olds don't know what to do with their parents. So I wasn't going to do that with my daughter and put her through that. So I had my dad be the one to make all my arrangements, and the Army didn't like that. But I was like, you don't work where I work, so I know what needs to get done. It was kind of entertaining because I was not going to spend any time in Germany any longer than I had to. That's how I looked at it. So first, like I said, start talking about, decide what's important to you in terms of medical care, organ donation, even funeral preferences. Simple steps like filling out a living will or choosing a healthcare proxy can make a difference, and it does make a difference. Documenting these wishes, keeping them accessible is crucial so that your loved ones and your healthcare providers can carry out your plans. And it is, like I stated earlier, when an investigator is out on scene, if all those documents are laid out, all we have to do is take pictures and call the funeral home and say, come and pick up so-and-so, the family is ready. It makes life easier. So how OMI can support families in a crisis? Well, we have a grief counseling service. We've had them for over 20 plus years, I believe. We've had grief counseling. We offer compassionate support to families in mourning. The only thing we do not do, our grief counselors, is if it's not an OMI case, they will refer the families to other counseling services. So we only see OMI case related families. So just keep that in mind. When OMI becomes involved, it's often during the family's most challenging moments. We approach each case with compassion, recognizing the pain and uncertainty that come with a sudden loss. Our staff is here to support families. We provide answers and we connect with them with grief services and support groups. We make sure that the cultural and personal beliefs are respected, and we aim to help families find peace and closure. They have access to the autopsy reports, examination reports as well. If we have to do an examination on their loved one, they do have access to the documents that we do have for families. So like I said, we go on scene, we work with the families as much as we can. We do understand they're grieving, it's sudden. They can get vulnerable. They get vulnerable on the phone with me sometimes, and I have to kind of go, okay, well, let's talk about your loved one. Tell me something funny. What did this person do? And then they start telling me jokes and stuff, and next thing I know, I spent about an hour on the phone with the family laughing. But that's the way for me to get them to kind of decompress, okay, OMI is not cold. We are not cold. So Decedent Affairs. So this is my department. And in March of 2022, OMI created Decedent Affairs. It was an idea that we had since 2013, that we needed like a little department that just handled permits, releases, and death certificates and worked with funeral homes and families. I was a part of that idea. We talked about. Well, when COVID hit and we all saw what the trailers, if you went to OMI and you saw all the trailers at OMI, we realized the importance of my department. So what we do in my department, we do quite a bit, and we just took on DNA and hospice. So in the beginning, we signed all the permits throughout the state of New Mexico, regardless if it's an OMI case or not. We do all the releases out of OMI, and we do death certificates. I'm hoping here, it's a wish, that we will start our integration with vital records so my staff can be more free to do other tasks that has been handed to us. So releases, we release to funeral homes, we release to tribal enrollment, we release to the Islamic Center. Now the families have to sign a release form if their loved one is at OMI. I always tell state statute is we release to legal next of kin. That's the funeral home. The funeral home has to ensure that they are working with legal next of kin. Once I see a signed release form or my staff, we will release their loved one back to the funeral home care. Tribal enrollment, the Pueblos, we work together hand in hand. We do release to the Pueblos, all 18, 19 of them, we will release to them. We try not to do an autopsy on a Native American body unless the pathologist deems that it must be done. So we respect, like I said, religious, cultural beliefs. We respect what the Native Americans and their beliefs. So we try really, really hard not to do an autopsy unless have to. Islamic Center, we release to the Islamic Center. Sammy, who works over there, he does all the releases. He's a very nice man. He even feeds us. He owns his own restaurant, so one day he brought us food because he works so well. Family releases. We will release to a family, but it is a very difficult task because it's a lot more cumbersome than what the family really thinks. So with the release, and we just did one last week, of a family of 3. So the family has to come to OMI. We have to process the death certificate. Then I drop it to paper because it's all electronic. Give it to the family. I try to give 4 or 5 copies to a family because I know how vital records, they can, you know, if you miss an I and didn't cross that T, they'll kick it back. They have to fill out the top portion. So that's 1 through 30, 1 through 28, I believe. And they're acting on the behalf of a funeral home. Once they take, and they have to take it to Santa Fe. They can't take it anywhere else but to Santa Fe. So if it means them driving 4 hours to Santa Fe, they're gonna have to do it. Once it's approved, it's registered at Vital Records, then they have to come back to OMI, sign the release form with me or my staff. Then they have to coordinate a time with us when they can pick their loved one. Now, once they do that, then they cannot open the body bag. It's not allowed. They can't even go across the street and open the body bag and see their loved one. We ask them that the body bag remain sealed and closed until they get to their final destination, whether that be at the natural burial cemetery in Belen or on their private property. They just cannot open that bag. We do request in the summer months, bring dry ice, bring something to keep that, because in a body bag, they're gonna decompose. So we try to tell families, we're very blunt, we're very honest, we're very direct with families about doing family burials. And then on top of that, they have to show me a document from their county that they can bury on their property. So it's a lot. And we always we don't want to discourage them, but we understand funeral homes are pricey. I mean, it's like over 10 grand, and it doesn't matter who you go with. It's over 10 grand. Right now, I think someone told me it's 8,000 just for direct cremation out of French mortuary. So you can only imagine what a family's looking at if they don't prepare. So I try not to encourage, but I understand families want to take it up.
So in terms of releasing to a family, and you said you need to have proof that they could bury on their property?
Yes.
Can you give us a little detail about what those parameters are?
So the question is about burying on their property and what they need. So they'll have to go to the county assessor's office. The county assessor will send out someone to zone to look at their property. They can't bury near a water source. They have to be X amount of feet from a water source. They have to be able to bury down low. And once they do that from the county, they'll get a notarized document. And I should have put one up there, what it looks like. It's a notarized document stating, yes, they can bury on their property. And they also have to disclose, if they sell their property, they have to disclose to the realtor and to the buyers that there's someone buried on their property.
Is there a minimum acreage?
No.
No. Okay.
It's all up to the county assessor's office.
Okay. And outside city limits?
Outside city limits. I know in Bernalillo County, if you live in the county, you may be able to bury, but you would have to talk to them and find out what the parameters are of burying on their property. Okay, so I explained cremation permits. Like I said, only funeral homes can cremate. And those are requested through the funeral home. So if the family wants to cremate, they go through a funeral home to cremate. There are some funeral homes right now online that offers $7.95 to cremate, $8.95 to cremate. Direct cremation, they don't get to see their loved one. It's just straight. So have the families do the research, look into what they want. Death certificates, like we only process what's related to OMI. That is all we do. Any death certificate is only OMI cases that we will process. So if it's under our jurisdiction, we will process. If we terminate jurisdiction, it's up to the physician or the certified nurse practitioner to sign that death certificate. I highly encourage, if you've been seeing your patient, you know, you do a disservice, they do a disservice when they don't sign, and then OMI has to pick it up. It's really sad and unfortunate. But, you know, let families know, have all of that laid out. The name of their PCP, when was the last time they saw their PCP? Have everything laid out in case OMI has to go out there and do a pronouncement. We have everything that we need. Now, back to it's really hard for families, and we understand the economy. And unfortunately, they can't afford a $10,000, the cheapest, $8,000 funeral. We get that. So what we do, we can only by state statute hold a body for 14 days. After 14 days, we do turn it over to the counties, all the counties, the 32 counties in New Mexico. We work with their county program coordinators for the unclaimed program. We work with them, and we ensure we let families know, because my staff are the ones calling on day 3, day 7, day 10, and then finally day 14, when I'm ready to process the document, we tell the family, okay, your loved one is now going to the county. We just can't hold, we just don't have the storage capacity to hold someone. And we understand, because I hear it from the funeral homes all the time. Well, we can't be with the family for 10 days. Get a bigger, cooler space is my answer to the funeral homes. Because we just can't hold them, unfortunately. As Dr. Dvorscak showed you, as our cases rise, so does our storage capacity. So we highly encourage families to start making arrangements rather quickly. So in this instance, if you're hospice, work with the families. You know, get them to start thinking about it. Final thoughts. So preparing for end of life isn't easy, but it's one of the most meaningful actions we can take for those we love. By doing so, we not only honor ourselves, but we also relieve our families of difficult decisions. OMI's work gives us unique insight into the significance of preparation, and we hope this conversation inspires you to take that first step. Your legacy is in your hands, and it's a gift of peace and clarity for those you leave behind. Okay, so we updated ourselves. And we have a QR code. If you get on our brochures, investigators have brochures. They also have a QR code on the back. And it takes them straight into the OMI website. There's any questions. This one on the screen, you will see a QR code that provides access to a planning list, which can serve as a valuable starting point for the important yet challenging process of end-of-life planning. We encourage you to initiate these discussions with your loved ones. And we are available if you have any questions.
Oh, questions. So, in your jurisdiction, if an older adult passes away at an assisted living facility or a memory care facility, are you contacted, or is that considered expected? Goes either way.
So the question was about those that die in like an assisted living facility or an actual care facility. So there are a lot of care facilities, skilled nursing facilities across the state. Those are typically considered attended deaths, unless there was some complication that creates an unnatural potential. So they fell, for example, and there might be some blunt hip trauma or some other trauma to the head, and they die at the facility, then that becomes our jurisdiction because of the potential for an unnatural death. However, if they are in hospice or under, care of a doctor routinely, in a facility that's known to be caring routinely, and they die of natural causes, nothing suspicious whatsoever, then no, we would not take jurisdiction over that case.
But an assisted
living, does not have, so if the person is not in a hospice, the assisted living does not have any medical staff, on board. Is that considered attended or unattended? And do we call the Bernalillo County, cremation and imaging program instead of calling OMI?
Gotcha. So the question was about, if there's no medical staff at a facility like an assisted living facility where they're mostly living alone but have some assistance, then OMI is potentially called into those. So we would like you to call us to report the death. And we will show up, and if we deem it potentially natural or most likely natural, or is more expected than anything, then that is what we were talking about, the JT or jurisdiction terminated. So we will come to the scene, we'll do an initial investigation. OMI will say, wow, this is natural. They're seen by a primary care physician for this problem list. And the death is most likely natural. We will step back and allow the primary care physician to do the death certificate at that point. So that is a call to OMI in that scenario. But we will most likely terminate jurisdiction unless we see that there's one leg shorter than the other, and I'm worried that there's a hip fracture, right? So that's why our investigator goes out to the scene and makes sure it looks natural. Great question.
So it's that the person is not in hospice, there is no medical staff at this facility, they are still to call OMI first.
To report the death, yes.
Report that.
They have to call 911 first.
Yes. So
Basically.
Yes.
So you're calling
What do we-
911.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Please repeat
And I'm piggybacking on this, so I want to stay here just a second. Same question, we are death doulas, so we are often working with folks who maybe aren't ready for hospice and have a very obvious reason and cause for death. Maybe you're working with physicians and whatnot. Clearly did not want 911 called. Is it possible to call OMI directly? Is that you have to go through the whole thing no matter what? Then I don't know.
Okay, so, okay, so the question was, we're a death doula, which is new to me. My daughter heard about this group and is like, oh, mom. We should do that. Okay. And family doesn't want 911. And they just want to call directly to OMI. You cannot do that. OMI is only activated when law enforcement contacts us. So we understand they don't want lights and sirens. Probably the best thing is when you're talking to 911 and saying, I'm reporting a death, so-and-so, let them know this person has passed away. We just need to activate OMI. We're well aware you're gonna come with lights and sirens and the whole bit, but the person has passed. Just kind of maybe working with dispatch would help you that they understand. Stress, passed away. How many times? Passed away.
There's no way to limit the amount of resources being pulled, because if you come in like the sirens in code 3, you're pulling away from somebody who may be saved in a moment rather, so there's no way around that.
No way around that. Unfortunately, OMI works off of law enforcement.
I would add one little thing to that. The best thing to do is get that advance directive out, right? So if you have the advance directive that says do not resuscitate, you can say that on the phone. I have a do not resuscitate order. Please don't come. We're not here to resuscitate. We're just trying to report the death, so OMI gets involved.
No,
Because that's the big fear, that they're gonna
Right.
start doing CPR.
Right.
right. And OMI has to show up with law enforcement there. We just can't unfortunately go by ourselves. Law enforcement must be there when we're there.
Oh, boy, lots of questions.
Huh?
So do you think going in for natural death?
Wait. She'll repeat it.
So,
And you wanna go to La Puerta, and you wanna just go in your shroud. You have to have this bureaucracy in.
yes, unfortunately,
So
yes.
repeat the question.
So the question, okay, so the question is, having the bureaucracy, like, you just want to be buried at La Puerta, that's the natural burial cemetery out in Belen. And you just want to be buried there, you don't want all this hoopla. If it's an unattended death, yes, like I stated earlier, someone at La Puerta has to file that death certificate. Yes,
Oh, okay, that's the caveat.
yes, it's unattended.
Unexplained.
And we need you.
Yes, if it's attended, you don't need us. Okay, unless, like Dr. Dvorscak said, there's a hip fracture, they fell, they tripped over a curb 2 days prior to death, and here we are. You need to contact OMI,
Unattended means no,
medical,
or a, or.
right, or a hospice nurse is there.
So I'm also an end-of-life doula, and I also support a lot of medical aid in dying ingestions without a clinical person in attendance. I have a lot of clients who at first say, I don't want to go on hospice. And usually if I say, if you don't go on hospice and we do MAID, I'm going to have to call the OMI when you pass. And that big scary idea usually motivates them to get on hospice. So I probably contributed to this big scary OMI kind of deal. I'll try to stop that. But so in my case, my understanding was I didn't have to call 911, that I could call the OMI because I have their request form. There's a doctor who's a prescriber but can't be there, so I'm there instead. So really, do I have to call 911 or can I call you guys?
Yes.
So the question was, for medical aid in dying specifically, whether they have to call OMI or not. So in these cases, it's kind of it's a funny workaround, but OMI does not actually certify the deaths for those cases. So we do not get involved. We will sometimes get involved only if there's a potential unnatural, and that should be screened beforehand, before they get enrolled into the medical aid in dying program. But the question, I believe, is do you still have to call 911 versus call us directly?
So my understanding was I could just call you guys directly, and I probably got that impression because I do work with doctors who prescribe, and they seem to know you guys, and they're just like, oh yeah, I just called so and so down at the OMI, and
So it's
so I'm just thinking, oh, I'm just
Yeah.
also Dr. So and so's friend down at the OMI, and my patient's gonna get pronounced.
so
So I just want to because I do work for End of Life Options New Mexico, and I want to make sure we're not spreading misinformation.
Right.
So if we have a client who's doing MAID, who's not on hospice, when they pass, how do we, and if the provider cannot come and pronounce, we thought we had to call you to pronounce.
and that I believe is true. Somebody has to pronounce them.
So we can call
Yes,
you
I believe
directly?
if the provider's not able to pronounce, if the provider's pronouncing, they're technically under care.
Right.
So
but if they're not,
if they're not pronouncing, there's no way that you can get a provider to pronounce, then yes, you do have to report it to us, and the only way to do that is getting 911 law enforcement involved.
okay, so we have to call 911 to get a hold of you.
It's,
Right,
No, but I'm talking about when the
Right.
provider's not
Yes.
there. So for example, a lot of the providers in New Mexico are in big cities.
mhm.
And like I might travel out to Portales or to Clovis or somewhere and do an ingestion. The provider is not gonna come out and pronounce. They're not on hospice. So it's me, and I need to make sure I'm doing the right thing when they. Like I said, so far it's worked to scare people and say, if you're not on hospice, I'm gonna have to call the OMI. But I know a day's gonna come probably when someone's gonna be, no, I do not wanna be on hospice. So I just wanna make sure we're doing the right thing.
and it sounds like you are. Okay.
Thank you so much.
I have two questions. The first one is, I was surprised to see your slides branded as UNM Medical Services. I thought you were a government organization. And then the second one is Diane, I don't know if there's an A on the end or not, talking about the indigent program, said that you all keep the Jane Does and John Does. And I'm wondering, do you keep them forever, or what happens there?
Oh, yeah, we can speak, so we can speak on that. So the first question was surprise branding with UNM. Actually, we are a quasi-state agency listed in the statute that is housed under the University of New Mexico. So we are a special project within the Department of Pathology, but we do receive state appropriation, state funding through government channels to operate. So it's kind of I would say a symbiotic relationship in some ways, where I have a academic appointment within the housed within the Department of Pathology, as well as my role as a forensic pathologist for the state. So I kind of do dual roles in a way, which promotes our education and research missions on top of our clinical service. So our clinical service is first and foremost the state, but it helps foster that education and research component that keeps us moving forward. And honestly, it's one of the reasons I stayed here was being an academic center. I have constant access to maintaining a level of being up to date. I'm up to date in my casework, constantly teaching, constantly involving the next generation of pathologists, which we desperately need in this country. So I think it's a great thing that we are associated with the university, and they've been able to foster relationships with other departments such as radiology, which is why we have the imaging capabilities we do. We're unique in the country with those sorts of things, probably because of our relationship with UNM. And the second part of that question,
John and Jane Does.
John and Jane Does.
Okay, so John and Jane Does are housed currently right now at Maxwell. We have over 200, and we just ID'd 13 of them through fingerprints from the 70s and 80s and early 90s. So we ID'd. We're now trying to locate families and to let them know that their loved ones have been ID'd, so we can so they can have that closure. And so in the 80s and 90s, they were half were housed at UNM and half were buried throughout the state. So my department, along with our medical records department and investigations, is currently right now putting a list together to where all our Jane and John Does are. So when we do start notifying families, we can let them know exactly where they're buried at. At the time, in the 80s and 90s, we were burying John and Jane Does, and then some of them were being housed at Maxwell as well. So we have like two areas where we're looking at. So Maxwell right now is providing a list of all their John and Jane Does that they have. And then off of that, whatever they don't have, we're assuming that they're buried somewhere in the state of New Mexico. In one of the cemeteries, which, we're trying to, some are closed, some are private, some are run by the archdiocese, some are owned by funeral homes who no longer exist. So it's a lot of work.
Could you say what Maxwell is?
Maxwell is the anthropology, part of the anthropology department. It's Maxwell Museum. And I went there, took an anthro class, and they actually use the John and Jane Does to assist future anthropologists of how to look at bones.
So current practice, just to jump on that a little bit more, current practice is that we don't bury them at all. They're not getting buried, they're stored with us indefinitely. So they'll be with us until we can identify them and get them to the right place. So what that means though, obviously with the process of decomposition, and with newer DNA techniques, we've actually been able to use forensic genetic genealogy in identifying some of these individuals from a long time ago, and reuniting them with their families. So we keep them because we don't know who they are, we don't know what their wishes are, and that. But you can imagine over the years that means need for more storage, right? So we're at our max capacity in many ways, which is why it's important for those that are identified to have some final disposition, essentially.
We have a question.
Whoa.
We have a question from one of our Zoom viewers.
Great.
They say, what if a loved one finds their spouse, in parentheses, with a heart condition, at home, not breathing, no pulse? OMI in rural areas too? Question mark.
Yes. So answering that question before actually repeating it, but I think it's from our online audience. So in a case like this, where you have a known heart condition, apparent death in bed, it's apparently natural, OMI will still get involved because there's no doctor overseeing them at that time unless they were on hospice care. So if they were on hospice care, it's a different story. But if nobody's overseeing, no physician is overseeing them at the time they died, then yes, OMI is in rural areas too. We serve the entire state. So we have about 16 central office investigators now that live and work in Bernalillo County, but we have about 100 to 150 field investigators that work all over the state of New Mexico in their respective counties. And they do this as an on-call job for us. So there are people who are death investigators in all the counties all over the state that will respond to those scenes for us. They will call the central office, let us know what's going on, and we will, what we call triage that case. Oh, it sounds like an apparent natural death, please terminate our jurisdiction. And the death investigator who went out to the scene will help facilitate that. So while we can't be everywhere, we have employees that are everywhere.
If there's no family involvement, how do you search for next of kin when there's no family involvement?
That's a great question. The question is about if there's no family involvement, we don't know who family is, there is no next of kin, essentially. What do we do? And I'm gonna let you take that one.
Okay, so once again, that falls in my department. So I have 3 individuals that search for families. We look under Facebook. We have Clear, which is a law enforcement kind of database. We have different search engines that we go through. A former employee of mine asked me, can I go into the dark web? And I went, go talk to IT. And he came back and said, IT said I can as long as I don't purchase anything. So they actually will dig deep. And unfortunately, there are families, there are loved ones that don't want to be found. And we had one last year like that, where we couldn't find any family. Like through all our searches, there was nothing. He came up empty. And the daughter called and I happened to take the call and she said, we visit my dad every week. And he was like on the corner of Driscoll and Central in that area. And he always was at Monte Carlo. And she said, so we walked into the Monte Carlo and they said, our dad passed away a couple of weeks ago. And I went, huh? And I looked at case notes. I was like, well, we couldn't find family. I'm so sorry. We were getting ready to send him through Bernalillo County IB. And she's like, oh no, this was his life. Like he lived on the streets. He didn't want any family connection. But it was interesting because she was sending me photos, because I had to make sure it was her father, of grandkids standing on the street corner with grandpa. And that was his life. So we do at times have families that will call us they went by the house or through Facebook, some type of social media outlet, and they'll hear, oh, so-and-so passed, really? And my team, we do everything we can to search, and they come up with, you know, 0. And we look through scene photos, that's why we're on our investigators about taking photos, you know, look at Christmas cards, look at something that will give my department, my team, a way of looking for family. And just recently, I had one where a nephew, she had a trust fund and lived in Santa Fe. And we couldn't even find her family, and we sent her through Santa Fe County unclaimed, and the only reason the nephew contacted me was because her house was on the foreclosure list and the trust fund contacted him. But there was no documentation, even through Clear, all our outlets that we look on, search engines, there was no way we would have found him.
Where does 23andMe DNA fit in for identifying, people?
Okay, so the anthropologist and I are kind of, that's like the wild, wild west right now, as she explained it to me. OMI is not involved in 23andMe and Ancestry.com, but it's something that we are actually looking at doing, the anthropologist and I, kind of testing the waters. But there's really, it's like she said, it's the wild, wild west, and it's up and coming, and everyone is jumping on the bandwagon. And the only reason I want to do it is because I did have a 1992 case, I believe, that I sent her through the county. And about a month ago, APD found the son. We would have never found her. Because you have to remember, the internet didn't come out until 1991. So anything prior to 1991, we're not going to find unless we know if they were arrested, and then we have to go through, do research through that. And they found her son. So that's why I went to our anthropologist, who's part of the DNA team, which falls under my department as well, just recently, and asked about, can we do this? Can we look into something like this so we can find families? Because I mean, I don't want to send them through the unclaimed program unless I can find a family.
How far down do you search? So there's no spouse, no parents, no siblings, no children. Do you go searching beyond that?
Yes, we actually do. We found aunts, uncles, cousins, oops,
Yeah, we go through, we'll even call the neighbor next door. We'll even talk to a friend, you know, the friend, oh, he was isolated, he didn't say much. We'll go as far as we can, because friends will call us and say, how do I claim? I want to claim. Or even the church, if they're involved in their churches, the pastor, the priest, anyone from the church community will call us and say, how do we claim? So I will tell them, per state statute, blah, blah, I forgot what it is. I used to know it. After 14 days, if unclaimed, I can release to you. The only stipulation to that is you can't cremate because you're not legal next of kin, but you can bury. And the funeral homes will honor that. They will say, okay, you can bury, because they're not going to get sued either if a family pops up somewhere. So but we do. I mean, we try every avenue we can in 14 days.
That was the point I wanted to make before, is we are under the same time clock. We can only hold the body 14 days, so we're under that same time clock of identifying them, trying to figure out who next to kin is. They are identified now. Now that clock starts before. So it's basically when they come in for an examination, that 14-day clock kind of starts for us as well. So we want to make sure we're doing our due diligence, and Veronica's team will uncover anything they can see in scene photographs. We rely on our investigators who are at the scene. Sometimes we'll call back to neighbors and try to figure out, sometimes we'll go, I've had investigators go out to like Joy Junction and try to say like, hey, you know, this person was found nearby here. Have you seen them? Who could they be? And then do they have any family that you know of, who their friends are? So I've had a number of cases where we have actually released to friends and family members who wanted to claim them that were not next of kin. So it does happen.
My question is kind of the inverse. What happens due to the high percentage of family estrangements that seem to be in our world today? If the next of kin does not want to claim the body or accept responsibility, what next?
Great question. So the question was, if the next of kin is known and does not want to claim the body, what happens essentially? So we will basically give them a release paperwork that will release them indigent to the county, unless there's another family member that wants to step in. Then we're basically asking them permission that other family member could take over the final arrangements. You want to add to that?
No, you actually covered it pretty good.
I know some things.
You trained. But yes, we do work. If family tells us straight out, we don't want to claim them, we will have them, we'll either go towards the county or is there anyone in the family that would like to claim? Like Dr. Dvorscak says, we try to do whatever we can for that person.
I'm gonna circle back a little bit to 23andMe, but reproduction is very complex and there's lots of variety. And so we have sperm donors. So there will be lots of half siblings from one particular sperm donor. So does that become, I mean, is that a relation? Is that a relationship?
So the question was about 23andMe and Ancestry.com and how we have, half siblings, half biological half siblings. What do? I actually release. I release off of half siblings. I will release off of step parents. We just did a few here recently, pretty much almost every day, we will release to either a step parent or a half sibling. Because to be honest, today's world, it's a blended family. The only thing is, I tell families is do keep in mind that the funeral home will ask, are you legal next of kin if you're requesting cremation? Because it's their license on the line. I mean, I don't have a license and neither does Dr. Dvorscak, but they do. And they have been sued for not using the legal next of kin. So they'll cover themselves rather fast and quickly. And I will ask them too.
Is that because when you cremate, you've destroyed the DNA?
Yes, everything's.
Otherwise, you could bury them and you could always use the DNA later down the road if you needed to.
Yes.
So that's the liability, is cremation ends that line.
Yes.
Of investigation. Okay.
That's also why we review the cremation permits, because I don't want to miss something that's potentially our jurisdiction. Concealed homicides, something potentially that we should have investigated, but we were never called about. So that tries to get through, and very often, almost every day, I'm reviewing a cremation permit with a death certificate that says head trauma natural. Well, head trauma isn't natural. So now I have to go back and go, hey doctor, what do you mean by head trauma natural? Oh, head trauma years and years ago. I just threw it on there because they had mental deficits from that. It's like, well, technically that's not natural. What's the story? Every once in a while, there's more, he had an acute brain bleed. And we called it natural because he died in the hospital. No, that very brain bleed might be from, somebody actually getting struck on the head or something like that. So we need to investigate this further as OMI. So that's why OMI does the cremation permits. We ensure that we're not missing something that would get cremated and have no evidence left, like you suggested.
In 2017 and 2018, the first two before I died New Mexico festivals, we actually got to tour the OMI laboratories. And it was the most popular event. We had to limit it to 30 people, and then the pandemic came. And any chance we could get back to doing a tour?
We are basically going to be under construction for a while. So our facilities were built in 2010, I believe, and really in full swing in 2011. And we, serve the entire state, and that's what, 12, 13 years now of everyday constant 365 day, 24/7 use of those tables and things. So things are aging. We have gotten funding from Dr. Gerald fought for funding through the state to get new autopsy tables in the suite redone, but that's going to take some time. So we're kind of going to be a construction zone for a while. That, and just as things get in more of the digital age and the advanced age, privacy and confidentiality is always a concern. And so we have not been bringing tours through OMI for other reasons.
And I don't know if you covered this because I left the room briefly, but real life versus TV, CSI, what do they get wrong?
Almost everything, actually. So the question was real life versus CSI. We cannot do DNA in 1 hour. We can't do tox in 1 hour. Things take a lot longer. Timelines are a lot longer. So I'm at the mercy of the labs, and I'm at the mercy of my own caseload every day. So you see how our caseloads are. There are 6 forensic pathologists for this entire state right now. We need 12. So we are all doing double work, including the chief and myself, who have a number of administrative duties on top of that. So every single day that I'm in the autopsy suite, I don't just see that one person, I see 10 or 11 of that one, and different types of death every single time I'm back in actual get up. So it's a limiting factor that we don't have enough pathologists. It's a limiting factor that our toxicology takes 6 weeks. Our histology takes a week, usually, sometimes longer. If we have to do extra testing on top of that, so we get the toxicology back and it doesn't make sense, or I have a question about some other substance that might be on there, it can take another 6 weeks on top of that. So that's already 12 weeks just to do tox. And then in things like neuropathology exam, so doing a extended brain exam for somebody who may have some findings in their brain that I need to work up, that takes a good 2 weeks to even start to do the examination, because of the way the brain is. The way the brain is made up of a lot of fatty tissue that doesn't fix well. What we call fix. We put it in a special solution that firms it up. And we have to wait until that special solution can permeate all the way to the middle of that brain. Otherwise, we're cutting a very soft organ and we may miss something. So that takes 2 weeks just right off the bat. So our turnaround time, believe it or not, my group is amazing. We are maintaining accreditation standards of turnaround time between 60 and 90 days. So that's when to start expecting when you'll see an autopsy report from someone who's had an examination at OMI.
And that's nationwide.
That's the expectation nationwide to maintain an office accreditation. There are other offices that can't maintain that. We also do, just because of the nationwide shortage is what I mean. And then there are, we also do the exam within 24 hours of receiving the body. So a lot of places may have to wait days to get to that particular decedent. We have a very quick turnaround to actually doing the examination. So if somebody comes to OMI, the next morning they're on an autopsy table. So we do them very quickly, but it just may take time for those results. So that's the biggest difference between TV and us. And I would also say that truth is really stranger than fiction. They can't come up with half the stuff I've seen. In practice.
So you're just for a party.
Yeah, I've seen some weird things, and one of my favorite case of all time was actually the first case of reported, it was a public health concern. Somebody was mixing stucco with groundwater and inhaled some of the groundwater, and that caused an amoeba in the brain. So I had to do the neuropath examination. It took time to figure out what was going on, but that amoeba essentially ate his brain. So that was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Unfortunate for that poor individual, but it was a health concern because other individuals was there aerosolizing what was going on with the stucco. So don't mix your stucco with groundwater.
What do you mix it with?
Tap water. He was using water that was sitting in the ground.
So seeing as CSI type programs are so popular, police procedurals, etc. But of course, they're written for the expediency of primetime television, not real world. Do you find yourself having to deal with unrealistic family expectations in terms of these turnarounds?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the question was about unrealistic family expectations because CSI and things like those programs are so popular. And I would say absolutely. Absolutely. It's a constant kind of re-education of the public and the families as I see them. I have met, and we use our grief services quite a bit. So our grief services will sit with me and actually physically meet with families. And they're like, well, why didn't this happen this way? It seems to me that this should have been a homicide. I've seen it on TV. I'm like, well, let's look at it together. And so it's a lot of public education on my part. It's a lot of sitting back and going, well, yes, it may look like that on TV, but there are 100 other things to consider in a real world scenario. And here's 10 of them, so, and it's a lot of my job, actually.
And that's where, so with that, my department, that's where I train my department and working with families, because families do call us and they don't understand. And we have to explain to them, this is not TV. You're not gonna have talks back and you're not gonna have this. No, you cannot see your loved one at our facility. We do have it as a policy in place that we don't have the viewing facilities. You need to see your loved one at the funeral home. Well, on TV, and it's like, I know what TV shows. Reality is, that you're not gonna have your loved one coming out with makeup on. Let's just be honest. And some families get it. Some, like last week, a wife threatened her attorney on me. And I was like, he could pull our policy. I'm still not gonna allow you to see your husband. You wait till he's at the funeral home. And then I go on to explain, the funeral home is gonna make your husband look beautiful. Your husband, and you're gonna wanna kiss him, and you're gonna wanna hold him, and you're wanna hold his hand, and you're gonna cry. I said, our facility isn't gonna make your husband look the way you want him to look. And well, she continued threatening me with her attorney, which is fine, and hung up. But once I start explaining to families in that certain format and kind of going, you want the funeral home to take your loved one now. You want your funeral home to do what they need to do so you can hold them, so you can kiss them, because that's their closure. Their life has changed. And the minute they see them, the past, that chapter's closed. They got to move on to a new life. And so that's where my department kind of fits in. We try to encourage a lot of, get a funeral home, get a funeral home. We can't stress that enough for families, that you want that, especially unexpected, like our homicides, where you see the increase of under 18, and try explaining to a mother on the phone that she can't see her baby here. And that is tough. So that's the encouragement we tell them is, you want your loved one at that funeral home so they can make her pretty, and you can hug and kiss and do all of this. And sometimes I get it, like I said, they'll get it, and sometimes they're unruly, sometimes we get them in our door. You know, they'll walk right through and start screaming and yelling. And like Dr. Dvorscak said earlier, then they get a black and white photo, and that's real. We don't, they see it the way we see their loved one. And after that, they shut down. Like, now I understand why you said what you said on the phone. There's a reason. Black and white isn't, you know, it's just as ugly as a color photo. And I hate to show black and white, but sometimes we have to just to get the families moving to the direction.
So is the whole thing of a positive ID,
I speak pretty loudly, but is the whole concept of a family member has to come in and make is that a Hollywood fabrication?
I would say most often they're identified at the scene by somebody who knew them. So most often we have an identification before we even leave the scene with our investigator who went to the scene, asks around, somebody found them, right? So somebody found them, talked to law enforcement. Unless that person is gone from the scene by the time we get there, that's usually what happens, is they'll get identified right there. If they are in a decomposed state or have so much injury to their face or something that prevents that from happening, we can do fingerprints overnight and get an identification back very quickly, more scientific. So I would say 90% of the time we have an ID within 24 hours without needing the family to come and say, yes, that's my loved one.
oh,
That's definitely a Hollywood thing. But there are very rare times where, you know, there isn't anyone at the scene, fingerprints don't hit a match. We're not getting a great match with dentals, but we have family members talking to us saying, hey, I think this is my loved one. We also have on the website, we have posted like missing people or not unclaimed people. So if you're missing a loved one, don't know where they're at, you can look at a basic description on our website to see if that matches who you're missing, and then call us and say, this might be my person. Then we can show you a photo that way, but that's rare, very rare.
And I think, and I don't know if you still do this, but you had some kind of grief program for the family of those who are murdered or.
So yes, absolutely. The grief services was the question. We have a very robust grief services. We've had grief services the entire time I've been in New Mexico.
And that's pretty
it's
rare.
It is extremely rare on offices across the country. So there's a government grant that they got for victims of violent crime. And then we've added on to that by employing interns who can basically grief services interns. They're learning the counseling services, they're learning things, but they are available to meet with families and basically on any death that involves OMI now. So we've expanded that program to not just victims of violent deaths, but to any death if there's any help, and they're available to us as well as employees. So it's fantastic to have them right on site. They help us work through, because obviously I'm meeting everybody at their worst day, right? So you can tell I get the gamut of reactions to death, from being very kind and considerate of what I'm doing and what I'm trying to help them with, to absolutely not wanting to hear it and I can't get through to them. So our grief services helps me as a pathologist talk to families in a compassionate way, and it also helps me foster my skills in my own professional development. So they're fantastic resources to have. You know, let your legislators know we need them desperately.
I'm interested in how you both cope in the work that you do. What is the support network in your office, in your profession, for the nature of the work that you do?
So the nature of the work that we do is the question, and how do we cope? So vicarious trauma is a real thing, and it's hard to separate sometimes that from your daily lives. But I make sure that I take time for myself. So that's my biggest thing. I have horses. I go ride in the mountains. It resets me. I remember why I'm doing this kind of a thing. But we have an incredible support network at work. So we have, because we're part of the university, we also have counseling services through the university if we need them. Our grief services puts on office programs once a month. We do things like paint rocks for meditation. You know, it sounds silly, but it gets the group together and talking to each other and well, using our hands in a different way. So we've done chair massages, and they've done things like bring in well, we wanted to do animals, but we are housed with SLD and can't because of the veterinary services. But you know, we have like offsite activities to do as a group that the office as a whole can participate in, which kind of gets us back together and why we're doing this. What else? We have a wellness room that we can actually go and just take time to decompress. And there's a lot of different efforts through the office to make sure that we're all able to do the job every day.
Well, for me, I just go and jog. So, yes, I actually lived the moment as a family because I lost my fiance in 2017. We were in a horrible motorcycle accident. Matter of fact, this month, November 18th, will mark 7 years. So I was that family. So going into work was hard. It's really hard. And being in the Army and being physically fit is what saved my life. So I jog like once, twice a week, unless the VA therapist gets mad at me. And she has, but I do go out there, I jog, I walk, I pray the rosary. I'm Catholic, so I pray the rosary. My staff, because of what we do, I allow them to go into my office. They close the door and they can yell at me for 20 minutes if they want. And they walk back out. What we do in certain areas, we do potlucks I threw a Super Bowl. I told one of the admins, put a Super Bowl potluck together and we all wear jerseys. Christmas, Halloween, different things that we'll do for each other. I bring in donuts, cookies. There's some staff members that are celiac. So I found gluten-free Oreo cookies, and right now there's 2 bags on my desk, and she probably already ate over half of them. But we do a lot. I'm very involved in the Funeral Home Association as well. So there are times where I'll call up a funeral director and, vent. One of my best friends owns a funeral home, and he's also a mayor. So I do call him and I'll go visit him, and I just need to talk, or I'll pick up the phone. I do Paws and Stripes. So I'm in therapy through Paws and Stripes for veterans. I was actually training a dog to be a service dog for me. Unfortunately, he passed away in June. So now I'm with this itty bitty little Shih Tzu who does not like to cuddle. I don't know why. Animals are very therapeutic. So we did, like Dr. Dvorscak, we did try to bring in some animals, and SLD kind of shut us down with that.
I'll bring my horses. It'll be all right.
It'll be all right.
There's a dirt lot across from us.
Exactly. Food trucks, we brought in food trucks. My daughter, not only does she work at a funeral home, she bakes. So when she was going through culinary arts, she would bring in all the baking goods to our office. The funeral homes right now, my department's getting really excited because the funeral homes will start bringing things to us. Just because we all walk the walk, and it helps. Like I said, it helps us a lot. I do encourage my staff to go outside and walk. I encourage them to do things. I encourage investigations to get out, especially when you come from a really horrible scene. And I was an investigator at the time I had the accident. You got to be able to just kind of let me go decompress for about 5 minutes. And that's what we do. We encourage each other to decompress as much as we can. Yes, it does get hot and heavy in there, where we're running scene to scene, scene to scene. We got families screaming at us. We got all this going on. But we encourage, do a 5-minute check-in with yourself. Go out, my supervisor, the operations manager, is very big on work-life balance and will encourage the supervisors, take time off. You need to go take time off. And that's what they'll do.
Yeah, and I would say the pathologist group, there are maybe only 6 of us, but we would jump hand over fist to help somebody out if they needed to be out suddenly. So we all cover for each other, we're all there. And that's what keeps me going.